Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War, not Frontline News Update, Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the 12th of February 2025. When you say the same thing day after day after day after day, and then one day your brain just goes, you start worrying whether your brain is up to the job. Anyway, let's start with what we normally start with, the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can find them in the description to the video below. I got that bit right. Okay, 1,150 personnel lost is a high number, but it is a downward movement from yesterday's numbers back to what we saw a few days back, somewhere between the 1,000 and the 1,300. So I think this is indicative that there is less activity on the front line than there previously has been. We're going to talk about that in a second. 9 tanks, though, is on the daily average, and I think that is contextually quite high. 27 troop-carrying airfields is above the daily average, and likewise there. 53 artillery systems is well over twice the daily average, and so that is really significant. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. We have 121 vehicles and fuel tanks, again stupendously high numbers in that category, as we consistently see, and 1 piece of special equipment. Worth noting that the drone number is very high there as well, so there are record numbers for drones, as we have seen with Dell's stats. Let's just have a little look to see if there are any more records. I presume that the 30-day rolling average for drones will be as at a record. Record again. Well, actually, so what do we have here? We have the drone 7-day rolling average is actually a record, not the 30-day rolling average. So that's interesting. Don't know quite why that's flipped there, because we've got some pretty high drone numbers. Vehicles and fuel tanks is at the 30-day rolling average record there. So some significant numbers in some of these categories. Now, in fact, before we go on to talk about the usual bits and pieces, let's go into this thread here, because I think this might give us an indication of what's going on and why we might be seeing some of these numbers. Remember, I spend all these days, I still have people come on, trolls come on and say, you believe in the general staff and this and that. And I just spent 3 years trying to establish how that they are far more credible than the Russian MOD, and that's an absolute given. But it's about trends and not the exact numbers, and it's trying to understand what's going on and to get an accurate picture of the front line, of the tactical, the operational, and the strategic, and of losses in general. Okay, on the Pokrovsk front, it says play for Russia can't keep the pressure anymore and was forced to downscale its offensive efforts. So that could explain why we are seeing fewer personnel lost. Ukraine is exploiting this by counter-attacking in many places along this sector, which you will have seen in my frontline updates. Please check out my last 2 frontline updates there. It's really interesting because I think the Russians are culminating. That's what the evidence suggests at the moment. While fortifications are being strongly reinforced with a novelty, the great use of barbed wire. Actually, I have seen Ukrainian use of, you know, those kind of almost those spirals of barbed wire. Those look like tunnels of barbed wire, and they put like 4 of those next to each other and run them right down areas, which I think, you know, would stop obviously humans from easily moving, but also light vehicles as well would get absolutely caught up in them. But anyway, here we have a thread. You can look at some of the defenses there. A lot of defenses behind the Ukrainian lines there, which is good to see. The question or the criticism of why they weren't put in place while Avdiivka was still being fought over all the way back over there. But nonetheless, good to see that, and other images there. I'm not quite sure what the red represents there. But anyway, Dachny and Andriivka. So this is further to the south around Kharkiv. This is the most difficult part of the whole Pokrovsk front. So it's not quite Pokrovsk, I'd say. It's further south, but nonetheless. For the Ukrainians, Russian forces pressure Konstantinopel constantly, but are always repelled without changes. Zelenivka, south of Ulakli reportedly changed hands twice today. In the morning, the Russians captured a village, but Ukrainian counterattack was able to clear part of the village in the afternoon. The destruction of 2 Russian tanks and 3 MTLBs is reported. Russian forces are also attacking east of Zelenivka on the opposite bank of the Sukyali River. Extremely harsh fighting is still ongoing. In Dachny, such as south of Karakova, the Ukrainians still control the southwesternmost corner of the town. Nonetheless, the Russians started accumulating infantry in the center for further assaults on the remaining Ukrainian positions in the village and around it. Fighting continues. The most difficult situation is Andriivka, which I said is certainly was an important logistics hub. Consolidated and secured last week's gains, and here the Russians consolidated and sorry, I messed that up. The most difficult situation is Andriivka, which some sources give as practically captured. Here, the Russians consolidated and secured last week's gains and continue wedging themselves in the town. At the moment, they're trying to fully secure positions on the western buildings of the town. The northern part is still controlled by Ukraine, but north of that, the Russians entered a trench system located on the dominant hill overlooking Andriivka itself, which endangers every Ukrainian position. The Ukrainians will have to retreat in the very near future from Dachny and nearby positions to Ulakli to avoid encirclement, as Konstantinopel is already being attacked from both sides. After, the Ukrainians will fall back to the line Konstantinopel to Rozliz, live before falling back again to the more solid Oleksivka Bahatir Koma line, where they're expected to hold out for some time. So let's put that on the map here. So Dachny, you got Karakova, Dachny just over there. You got the Ukrainians having lost this area with the trench line running east-west there, south of Karakova. The Russians have moved along there, and they're moving now they're fighting in Andriivka, which has a number of roads going through it. That was an important logistics hub, but of course now, it's not leading anywhere particularly. But all of these areas are now under an awful lot of pressure, as the Russians have been very successful around the Karakova area. So while the Ukrainians have done a really good job of stopping the Russians around Pokrovsk, it does seem that around here the Russians are still making gains. They are slower than they have been, the Russians, in their advances, but they are still a real challenge for the Ukrainians there. And lots more to be said about the front line. We'll look at this thread in more detail in a frontline update that will be forthcoming. But the one I do want to talk about is just this area, which is just south of Pokrovsk. So that's Pokrovsk there. You've got Kotlina there and Pischany, where the Ukrainians have been attacking, some claiming they might be trying to cut off this whole area. So this is one of the most interesting regions here. The Ukrainian Skala Battalion and other units were involved in a series of successful counterattacks. The southern hamlet of Kotlina was almost completely recaptured. Reports of Ukrainian advancements north of Kotlina are present, claiming the Russians retreated to the mine northeast of the town. Pischany was also likely completely liberated, according to DS Deep State and various Russian and Ukrainian reports, while the Russians are also slowly retreating in mine number 3, just east of Pischany. In general, the Russian spearhead was blunted here, and Russia is discouraged from further attacks because of the threat of encirclement and deterioration of logistics. Fierce fighting is still ongoing. Updates are to come in the next few days. So the point of me including this in today's video is that there are areas where the Russians seem to be under the cosh and seem to have culminated. Areas still where the Russians are in the, well, not in the ascendancy, but do have the momentum. So Karakova, it definitely seems like the Russians have the momentum there, possibly to the west of the Oskil River, right up north. But in other areas of the front line, particularly around Pokrovsk, the Russians seem to have run out of momentum somewhat. And they are taking huge losses. There's this fascinating video that's come out here showing both casualties and just completely destroyed vehicles. In fact, motorcycles that have been used in attack that have been completely and utterly flattened. Just look at this one. It's obviously being run over by a tank. Is imprinted in the ground, as is another one there. They're pulling out the casualties. Look, they're walking. The place is covered in destruction. A Russian soldier shows the aftermath of a failed assault, numerous casualties, and a road littered with destroyed equipment. So I won't play it on from there because I'll get in trouble. But there are still these videos coming out of stupendous amounts of equipment and a lot of casualties being lost. And talking of casualties, more Russians are being sent back to the front despite grave injuries. It's just a death sentence, says Jane Kiev. Russia is truly a land devoid of all morality and absolute slave society. And there are a number of these videos of Russians seriously injured. Here's someone on a crutch being sent back to the front. There is, as I mentioned, there are a number of videos of people on crutches going through fields being attacked by drones. It definitely appears that there is a problem. So Chris Owicki has written a thread, and in fact, this is one of the videos there that you will have seen over the last few days. These people on crutches, guy crawling there. Russia is systematically sending badly wounded men back into combat, often denying them medical treatment. Previously, men were allowed to recuperate or leave the army if seriously injured. Now, death appears to be the only way out for many. So this is all about building up a picture. We go back to this and say, okay, heavy losses, heavy casualties have been taking place now for a year, okay? That will take its toll on the Russians. At some point, they are going to be unable to continue to do this. So then you start looking at the maps and going, okay, so it looks like they are stopping being able to continue at the rate they were. And they appear to have an awful lot of people who are injured. And if they're throwing those people back into the fray, that suggests that they are desperate for people, which then explains why they might well be culminating along the front lines. Anyway, back to this thread. The independent Russian news outlet Okno Press reports that since November 2024, the Russian army has routinely been sending men with category D, that's unfit, fitness ratings, back to Ukraine to fight on the front lines. The army has ignored court rulings to release them. Okno highlights a number of cases. One man from the Tver region, Ilya Kovalenko, was mobilized in September 2022. He's badly wounded by shrapnel in October 2023 and taken to hospital. He is now only able to walk with crutches due to nerve damage. Despite being rated unfit for service, he was sent to the 15th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade in Samara, where he now faces being sent back to Ukraine. Although the Tver Garrison Court ruled in favour of dismissing him, the army has refused to release him. Kovalenko's lawyer laments, quote, despite the court's decision, he may end up on crutches under fire. We simply cannot influence the commanders. Even the court cannot tell them what to do. His case is one of many. A Mobilization News Telegram channel reports on a case of E.S. Shabet, who was sent to the front along with various other injured and sick soldiers, some of whom were still mobile with the aid of crutches. Shabet was rated category D with a complete exemption from military service, but the army has ignored this, as well as his appeals to the military prosecutor. Not surprisingly, injured soldiers are not combat effective. Only 14 out of 74 men from his group, serving with the 27th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, have survived 2 months of fighting. All have sustained further serious injuries. So that's 60 out of 74 men have died, 14 are left, and they've all got serious injuries. Human rights activist in Siberia says that the army has been systematically rounding up the wounded since November 2024, and I showed you this video previously, including men with missing limbs. Numerous videos have emerged of a wounded man being seized or while appealing for help. Before that, quote, before that, my clients whose cases were pending in court could at least walk the streets calmly, but in November they grabbed 2 of them with category D at once. One was walking along the street on crutches after being wounded, so within a few days he was sent to the border. The second one, with a disabled arm, was sent straight to the front line. And since then, there has been no contact with him. It's terrible to think that they've sent a one-armed man to assault, but apparently that's how it is. He's probably already dead. In what is perhaps a logical extension of the trend, Russian soldiers have complained of being denied medical treatment for serious injuries before being sent back to the front line. There's another video of someone doing that as well. There have been videos of seriously injured men at the front lines on crutches with broken limbs and Ilizarov fixators on their legs. Russian commentators say that the only fitness criterion now seems to be whether a man can hold a rifle. And here's another video that gives you a sense of what some of these units alike, with 2 people on crunches in just that group of 5 people there. Quite incredible. This is not simply a case of putting wounded men in the trenches to hold the line. Videos have emerged showing injured Russians on crutches and walking sticks walking to locate Ukrainian positions across open fields. Not surprisingly, few survive. Here's another one of these videos of people on crutches going to the front, to the contact line. Absolutely incredible. Russian war bloggers blame this on a variety of factors: a shortage of manpower, constant need to replace daily heavy casualties, brutal commanders who lie about their losses, and a system that sees men simply as expendable assets. 100%. Then we hear this. Chris Wiki again, only half of the artillery pieces and some Russian units are able to fire or hit targets, according to Russian artillerymen, due to a combination of inexperienced soldiers being unable to maintain them, a lack of people to fire them, poor command, and faulty ammunition. The Russian call sign Ossetin Telegram channel passes on the comments of an artilleryman who is fighting on the Kherson front. Once again, quote, once again, the issue of the quality of training of specialists becomes relevant. It seems that all the necessary calculations are in place. Commanders give instructions, but when it comes to the actual work, the problems begin. In particular, in a particular artillery battery, only 2 out of 4 guns actually work. The rest are either inoperable or there is simply no one to service them. The main reason is insufficient qualification of the personnel. When people are assigned to a gun without experience, without normal training, without understanding the mechanics of the barrel, wedge and carriage, nothing good can be expected. A howitzer is not just load and fire. And I've talked about this previously, that whenever you see guns being hit, these howitzers being hit by drones and whatnot, you will often get injury or death to the people operating them. Not all the time, but sometimes you will. And there will be a degradation over time of experience. And that is going to eventually count. And it looks like it's counting here. The gun, quote, the gun requires constant maintenance, cleaning, adjustment, checking for wear and tear of parts. If this is not done, the weapon will simply fail at the most crucial moment. A recent inspection showed them that most of the squad could not even properly disassemble and reassemble the locking mechanism. And if you add this to the problems with ammunition, they are sorted haphazardly without analysing which batches are better suited for specific conditions. It becomes clear why our efficiency is lagging. The deviation of a shell to the left or right is not only the fault of the ammunition, but also the mistake of the gun commander who does not monitor the alignment. I do not see a problem in improving skills in my free time rather than stupidly waiting for orders from above without showing any initiative. Commanders try to give orders, but there are gaps in the control process. Combat work requires responsibility, not just formal execution of orders. It's a pity that in the 3rd year of the war, not everyone understands this. Victory is ours, or maybe not. This goes back to something that I said long ago when I had trolls going, hang on, you say that, and this was at the time when artillery was doing more of the damage and was killing more people. So at the time it was like artillery is supposed to be responsible for 80% of casualties. Now FPV drones and whatnot have really taken the lead there. But the claims were, hang on, you say that the Russians are losing way more troops than the Ukrainians, but the Russians are also firing 6 to 7 times as many shells as the Ukrainians. So you're obviously wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. And I was saying, look, there's an awful lot going on here. First of all, the Russians just do these barrage of artillery. They just flatten places. They don't go for precision. Second of all, they can't go for precision because they're, as you're hearing here, like problems with the shells themselves, or maybe the munitions as a whole, explosives and whatever, problems with training, with wear and tear. You put all of these things together and you start seeing these howitzers getting moved closer to the contact line within 10 kilometers because they can't hit their sort of 24 kilometer range or whatever it is they should have, because the wear and tear is poor, which then affects their accuracy and range. So the success of the Russians in precisely hitting Ukrainians is much lower, I would argue, than vice versa. The Ukrainians have much better success at hitting the Russians using much less ammunition. And this is another piece of the evidence to suggest that is indeed the case. But yeah, on the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians left an entire fleet of vehicles on the road, according to KUP. On the road from Pustinka to Hryevka, on a strip of land just 1.5 kilometers long, the Russians left 35 destroyed vehicles and 1 APC. Just incredible statistics of the stuff that is being lost. Now, I don't know if most of these were kind of unarmored vehicles, but again, it goes back to these stats. When you say, oh, surely the Russians aren't losing this much. I can't believe you believe the Ukrainian general staff. And you're thinking, hang on, we've got visually confirmed evidence of 1.5 kilometres of road. Just one road, 1.5 kilometres, and you got 35 vehicles destroyed. Just absolutely insane. And then, if you wanted to see a Bukanka on fire and then fundamentally disassembling, check it out there. So that's a Bukanka. That's an example of one of these vehicles on the road doing that. Yeah. Right, moving on to distance strikes. It was a pretty tough night for the Ukrainians last night. 2 nights in a row, we've had quite a few missiles sent, particularly ballistic missiles last night. Apparently 6 out of 6 Iskander-Ms, or S-400 ballistic missiles, surface-to-air missiles using ballistic in ground mode, were taken out. So that's exceptionally good. 123 Shahed drones were sent. It looks like 12 got through, which is a pretty high number. That's about 10%. That's quite high considering we have had nights in the last few days in this last week that were 100%. So to go back to 90% is a bit of a kick in the teeth there. So it was a pretty tough night, I think. Although it says 6 out of 6 ballistic missiles were taken out, what goes up must come down. Zelensky, last night Russia attacked Ukraine with ballistic missiles and drones. Apartment buildings, office spaces and civilian infrastructure were damaged. Tragically, as of now, 1 person has been reported dead in Kiev and 4 others, including a child, have been injured. This is where someone died, I think. The sound of this gives you a real sense of the destructive power of these ballistic missiles and what happens, sadly, often in these civilian areas. Now, I assume this is one of those ballistic missiles coming down in a place where it probably wasn't aiming, but I don't know for sure. That's Kiev, and indeed, this looks to be the aftermath of that exact strike. The aftermath of a Russian missile attack on Kiev this morning. 1 person killed, 4 more injured, including a child. Someone saying that people in my neighbourhood collapsed unconscious from the blast wave. Those bastards sent a 9-year-old girl to the hospital. And indeed, it looks like they've killed someone too. A huge crater in the Obolonsky district of Kiev after the morning strike. So look at the destructive power of that missile. That has left a massive crater. But luckily, it looks like that's not actually had a direct hit on a building or anything. So, thank goodness for small mercies. I don't know whether, again, this was a missile that hit there without being taken out by electronic warfare or air defences. I don't know the exact situation. A Russian missile attack on Kiev damages state-run TV channel's office. A Russian ballistic missile strike on Kiev on February the 12th damaged the office of the state news channels Freedom TV and DIM news channels announced. So it could be that that's what they were aiming for, and the circle error probable meant that it didn't quite hit on the noggin, did some damage to those institutions, but not too much. Or it could be that was electronic warfare that's forced that awry. Okay, last night I showed some of the effects of the ballistic missile strike on Kryvyi Rih. So that was targeted over the last 24 hours. No one died, but there was a damage to multiple buildings, including a school, hotel, petrol station, and 3 apartment blocks. So Kryvyi Rih was targeted. But also today, it appears that there have been repeated explosions in Sloviansk. That's, if you remember, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar. Then you've got Konstantinivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, those cities around there that just get repeatedly hammered by the Russians, and they're getting indeed closer as they move through Chasiv Yar. Russia's firing rockets and aerial bombs. Police in Free Donetsk say Konstantinivka, as just mentioned, was hit by no fewer than 14 250-kilogram guided glide bombs yesterday. 3 people injured. I just find it amazing that people don't die. It's just as often as they do, because they just litter these cities and towns with these guided glide bombs. No reports of injuries that I've seen from this morning's attack by Russia, so it is an ongoing thing. Now, the other night, Poltava, as mentioned, was struck, and a gas pumping station, I think, or gas processing facility was struck. And there's actually video evidence of that now. Footage on Russian channels seems genuine. They claim it shows this morning, so yesterday morning's multiple missile attack on gas production facilities in Poltava. This is near Mirhorod. It also proves Russia still has agents inside Russia willing to film the exact location, is the claim from Tim White there. We've had a first statement regarding the attack on Poltava. DTEK, so they're the private energy concern, says Russia's missiles hit their gas production center in the region. Quote, the facility is not operating. An assessment of destruction and damage is being carried out. Tim White says, assume this is a genuine photo of the site. So that was struck a couple of nights ago and is in a spot of bother. Now, Russia attacks Ukraine, leaving 50 apartment blocks without heating for hours in Poltava. So that was a result of the Poltava strikes the other night. But Tim White then adds, meanwhile in Rostov, no missiles or drones landed, but almost 9 times more residential high-rises are cold today and will be cold tomorrow after poor maintenance caused 2 problems. So problems with gas and heating in Rostov in Russia, but it's not because of missiles, it's because they're not spending enough money on infrastructure as they're spending it all on a war with Ukraine. And so explosions in Kryvyi Rih, Dnipropetrovsk was also under threat last night. I don't know if it was hit with ballistics. So yeah, it was quite a tough night for the Ukrainians. Now on to other bits and pieces. We're going to start with, I've already gone through that. Europe faces total Russian occupation without Ukraine's army, Zelensky says. Without Ukraine, Europe will be totally occupied by Russia if they want, Zelensky told The Guardian, pointing to Russia's current numerical advantage. So still putting the pressure on Europe to recognise the threat that Russia presents. I also just wanted to give props to The Guardian. So The Guardian is featuring quite a lot in, not from me featuring it, but from a lot of my sources are giving articles from The Guardian on Ukraine. And it's just worth noting that they do a pretty good job. You know, as with New York Times, any media site, some articles will be a little less pro-Ukrainian as we might like. But generally speaking, The Guardian does a really good job. Ukraine is still up there on its main banner across the top. And if you click on that, Ukraine features every day with some serious articles every single day. And like I've said to you before, I'm a subscriber to The Guardian. I pay for a subscription because I think if we don't do that to at least one, and maybe even local news is dying. So subscribe to a local news source. So investigative journalism still continues. We may slag off mainstream media, but without them, no one is holding governments to account. It's really important. Guardian do a good job on Ukraine. So just, as Chris Hayes said the other day about the New York Times, these aren't clickbaity articles. They will not get their advertising revenue and whatnot from people reading this stuff. This is the kind of lost leader stuff that they do. So we need to be communicating to these news sites that Ukraine is still important by clicking on their Ukraine articles and reading them whenever possible. I know most of you just get all of your news from me or similar YouTubers and whatnot, because thankfully you seem to think that we are accurate and useful or something like that, and I thank you for that. But don't forget these other sources that are often the actual primary sources where they have journalists on the ground doing this stuff. Just, we can slag off mainstream media, of course, there's a time and a place for that, but it's also insanely important that we still maintain news media outlets that are doing the job of journalism, often on the front line. And I just think The Guardian, I know it's, you know, centre left or whatever, but they do a good job of supporting Ukraine and keeping Ukraine in the news, and I think that's super important. Now, I find this fascinating. So Zelensky has commented that people were killed inside the presidential office. Zelensky comments on Russia's assassination attempts going back to 2022. An attempt to assassinate Zelensky at the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022 resulted in people killed inside the presidential office, Zelensky said in an interview, again with The Guardian, published today. So there you go. I think there will be so much fascinating information coming out about this war in the years, maybe decades after it finishes. And, you know, those early days in the presidential office, it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how it played out, personally, and hearing about how people died as a result of attempted assassinations on Zelensky. Right, the Foreign Ministry, good, has denounced corruption allegations made by Tucker Carlson. This is a lie, spokesperson Tiki has said in response to Carlson's unfounded claims that Ukraine resold US weapons on the black market. Now, lots of people have come out and absolutely excoriated Tucker Carlson. I believe, is it Jake Burrows at Ryan Macbeth has done a big takedown of what Tucker Carlson claimed. Of course, Tucker Carlson's claims were prima facie absolute nonsense. 50% of all the aid, were they flying in these massive carriers into Mexico to drop off Patriot air defense systems and NASAMS and Bradleys? I mean, it's absolute nonsense. But he is now very obviously a paid up agent of Russia. He's getting his information. When he says, I know this is a fact, where do you get this from? Who are his sources? He is being fed stuff by Russia directly. I would bet my mortgage on that. Right, Russia's violated Poland's airspace. A military jet went 6.5 kilometers into Polish territory last night, I believe. Predictably, Russia has an excuse, blaming a navigation system failure. Remember when Turkey shot down a Russian jet doing exactly the same thing? Putin did nothing. Jets stay clear. I've often thought about this, that people like Poland should just shoot down a Russian jet that goes over its airspace, because Turkey did that, and there was a bit of a kerfuffle in the short term, but essentially nothing happened. And that's Turkey shooting down a Russian jet a couple of years back. That needs to happen. I think we need to just get harsh on Russia. Now, Ukraine's population has apparently dropped to 32 million. I'd heard rumours it was down to 28 million. That's what Greg Terry was saying some time back. But claim here from Deputy Prime Minister Chernyshov is, as of late 2024, 32 million people live in Ukraine, down from 42 million a decade ago. So that's losing roughly a quarter of their population. That's insane. The Ukrainian nation totals 60 million, but half reside abroad as migrants, refugees, or diaspora. So there's a big diaspora community that predated the war, but since the war began, losing 10 million people. Wow. This is back to Tucker Carlson. Sorry, this is out of place, but this is Randy Mott. He's a very strong Republican, saying I think he's back on this fake story. Because it wasn't just about Ukrainians selling half of their weapons to the drug cartels in Mexico, but he also claimed that the Ukrainians are the richest people in Europe and they keep going around blah blah blah. So this is back in 2022. Ukrainian officials allegedly bought real estate in Switzerland using USAID money. The claims are based on fake quotes from the land registry. There is no evidence that Ukrainian officials used the money from USAID, and yet you've got Tucker Carlson still coming up with shite like this. Tucker, I think he's back on this fake story. Tucker never checks anything that makes Russia look good or Ukraine look bad. Carlson is lazy, biased, and a grifter, and it's really good to hear that coming from a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. Ukraine's sorry, just done that. I've got myself, my knickers in a twist. Zelensky's publicly endorsed the completion of the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant expansion project, calling it a cornerstone of Ukraine's energy independence and regional stability. It's exactly what I said should have happened, should be happening, and of course it is. I'm no great oracle or anything. But when you are looking at how the energy infrastructure in Ukraine is being absolutely hammered, gas, thermal power plants, combined heating and power, etc., nuclear power plants seem to be ring-fenced because it's too dangerous to attack them, and nuclear fallout can then go over your own country because you're a neighbour, and then the international community would go absolutely bonkers. So it should be about diversifying, decentralising. So I think it should be, and this sounds like a big environmental statement, but it's not. It's an energy security statement. It should be about diversifying, decentralising with renewables. So you've got solar, wind, etc., but having your core basis in nuclear. And that would mean you can provide enough energy consistently for your big industries through nuclear power, and then you can help you generate as we're looking at doing in the UK, really. So we're now producing an awful lot more renewable energy than we were. Renewables have become a lot cheaper. There was talk about this yesterday. Who was it from in America saying that there was someone that's written analysis saying that Trump is going to struggle to overturn the green transition because renewables have become that much cheaper that actually it doesn't make economic sense to do that. It's irreversible now. So fossil fuels will be possibly a thing of the past, but in terms of Ukraine, it's a completely different set of reasons. It's to do with these big old power plants that are coal power plants or whatever, being far more susceptible to Russian missile strikes than nuclear power plants or diversified smaller energy creation around Ukraine, such as solar power and wind and whatnot. Okay. Germany, this is in some ways more serious than Russia's sabotage of our undersea cables, says Edward Hunter Christie. Sabotaging military assets is pretty damn close to a preemptive kinetic attack. The effects are potentially the same. The intent it reveals pretty much is identical. We are in a state of pre-war with Russia. So this is several German Navy ships have been sabotaged. Baltic Sea bases have had intrusions via both land and sea, and staff have been approached. One sabotage included several kilograms of metal shavings into the engine of a yet-to-be-christened corvette. And that news piece is doing the rounds at the moment. Moscow knows that with certainty that Europeans, most notably Germany, would never commit aggression against Russia. Sabotaging our military capabilities today is preparing the ground for war tomorrow and constitutes a very serious escalation. So I wonder if anything will be done about that. Now, Russia is bracing for economic crisis as it revives its COVID-era committee. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said the commission resumed work in December 2024, focusing on 9 key sectors and over 2,000 enterprises. In other words, Russia are in panic mode, and they are putting into place kind of emergency measures that were similar to ones that they had when there was a pandemic. This is the time when the US should be putting its boot even more firmly on the neck of the Russian economy. And finally, the GUR has hacked the Russian giant Gazprom. On February the 7th to 8th, cyber experts attacked the main contractor of Gazprom and 22 other companies that service the Russian oil and gas infrastructure. 120 servers, 2 million gigabytes of documentation, and more than 10,000 computers were destroyed. All systems were stopped, and the losses could reach hundreds of millions of dollars. That is insanely successful there. So the GUR, the intelligence services of the Ukrainians there, causing potential catastrophe within the Russian hydrocarbons sector with a massive cyber attack. My goodness, incredible. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate your support. I really do. We're on the way to 50,139, which is a magic number that everyone's been waiting for in terms of subscribers. So if you can find a second to click on my stupid face up there somewhere, you'll be able to subscribe to the channel. It doesn't really make any difference. I just want to get to 50,139. Make an old man happy. Take care. Speak soon.